You got a good 20 seconds wasted of your life. You're never getting that back.
That's true. I mean, then again, there was this entire episode.
That's true.
Remember watching Ghostbusters, but it was just missing something? Have you ever found yourself playing a Mario game and just feeling empty? Like, remember playing the big new Mario game and you're just sick of red? Enter Luigi's Mansion, the game that quells all of those thirsts at once and more.
Dude, this even sounds like it could be the opening to the Ghostbusters theme. We're fine. Something strange.
We're gonna call Luigi.
God.
Alright, do we want to play out the options first?
Sure,
I mean,
let's...
he looks like he's having fun.
He does. I'm not yet. Stereo, rumble on, standard controls, brightness.
Oh, hey, we can view a Pikmin movie.
Let's do it. I mean, here's the problem, though. I don't live in a mansion, so 0 out of 10, this game's unrealistic.
That's true. It will be impossible for either of us to ever afford a mansion.
See, I can't relate to this, and because, once more, neither of us can afford a mansion, I can't judge the quality of this game, because I have nothing to compare it to.
But you're a cryptid in a haunted locale, aren't you?
That's supposed to be a secret, man. Come on.
What are you talking about?
Now, if this was Luigi's Suburban Adventures, maybe
That's true.
then,
You would be all about that.
maybe then we could relate. You know, more of like a Paperboy aesthetic, only with less of the weird alien nonsensical stuff going on. But anyway, guys, on a more serious note, this is Luigi's Mansion for the Nintendo GameCube, a game released in 2001, along with the launch of the system on September 24th in Japan, November 18th in North America, and May 3rd for all of our EU folks. And sorry, I'm a wee bit lazy to check on the other release dates. They probably fall somewhere in that time window. Flashes the thumbs up. Anyway, this is the 5th best-selling GameCube game of all time. Although, to be honest, considering the GameCube only sold 13 million units, I'm not sure whether that's a testament to Luigi's Mansion being good or the GameCube just being irrelevant in terms of console sales that generation.
I think it was both.
Yeah, I mean, it was going up against the PS2. Anything not on the PS2 looks abysmal that generation, so... Hey, and it also got a 3DS remake in 2018. Yeah, stop and think about that one for a second. This was into the Switch's launch, and we were still getting significant 3DS remakes. Why Nintendo? Anyway, this game overall is pretty good. I had some fond childhood memories of it growing up. Mom, it's been so long.
Why is Dad trying to suck you off?
Going back and playing it again with my pal Logan here just to get a refresh on it was a pretty good overall experience. I remember growing up being very scared of it, a little bit creeped out just because I wasn't used to that type of thing. Much like the suburban area, it kind of lived in a bubble with my video game tastes growing up. So anything that went outside of your typical Mario and Pokemon and Mario was a little bit weird for me, and then you had the mildly creepy aesthetic going on. I mean, when people see Luigi's Mansion now, we're used to Luigi's Mansion 3, Dark Moon, both of which have more of a cartoony vibe to them. They're much more of a, hey, I just stepped into Saturday morning game, versus this, well, it's still got a lot of that Nintendo whimsy. There is an underlying creepiness to it.
I still maintain that this is the best Luigi's Mansion just because of its aesthetic.
Out of all two.
Technically 3, but
the
like,
3's not out
I
yet,
know, but like you could still
as of the time
tell.
of this recording.
You could still tell that like they're going for like this weird cartoony thing.
I'm hyped.
And
for
like
the
I'm
third
not
one.
saying that this is like, oh, this is Luigi's Mansion is such a serious game. It's so dark and gritty, but at the same time, when you compare it against the new ones, it kind of looks that way.
I mean, back in the day, I was pretty terrified of this game as a child. I will admit, just because the whole ghost thing has always kind of spooked me out.
Yeah, and like even this environment is pretty chilling. Like quite literally, look at Luigi's hole.
Exactly. Exactly.
A lot more particle effects too, I'm noticing.
You gotta love that GameCube, man. That's my favorite toy Nintendo's ever released. Yes, that's right, kids. This was marketed as a toy. Remember that. When it actually
explains a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it has a bloody handle on it. It works for me. It works for me. But anyway, back onto the topic of Luigi's Mansion. Overall, this is a game centered around solving puzzles within a mansion, once more highly unrelatable for most of us out there, but hey, what's the purpose of games? In order to progress further in the mansion and go essentially ghost busting as everyone's favorite green protagonist.
So, what did you think of the gameplay overall?
I mean, given how you had the controller most of the time, it's been years since I've actually touched it, which is fine. In terms of the gameplay, I feel like it overall still feels very modern. I feel like the approach Nintendo took was relatively simple to this game, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. A lot of games from that era that had more complicated systems in place in terms of how they controlled and such. I think, for example, of like Pikmin's controls being a little bit clunky in retrospect compared to modern stuff once you get used to it. This game, because it took more of that simple approach, jumping back into it doesn't necessarily feel all that awkward because there's not so much going on to keep track of. Or even Super Mario Sunshine feels rather clunky by today's standards.
Yeah, you definitely touched on something that I was going to get to, which is that this game overall doesn't feel dated, especially, like you said, with aspects of the gameplay itself. There are certainly parts of the game that are dated, obviously, because it's, launch title for the GameCube, but you can't really be mad at it for that. It wasn't trying to break any new ground. It was trying to tell a story and be a fun sort of pastime sort of game, and for that, Luigi's Mansion does quite well.
Yeah, I agree. Just touching on the gameplay more, I guess my one issue with it is the gameplay, while it's fun and enjoyable and simple, at times that plays against it a little bit because I feel like it fails to always spice things up enough to keep it interesting for a full playthrough of the game. It is relatively short, which means it kind of gets in, does its job well, and gets out. But at the same time, it's kind of walk through the mansion, solve a puzzle, find the ghost within the room, figure out what you need to do within the room to get the ghost to be visible to you so you can hunt it, get out, go after your 100 or so boos within the mansion. There's not a ton of depth to it, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's not the type of game that I'd sink, 30 plus hours into in most cases.
Well, yeah, it only lasts around 9.
Exactly. But I don't feel like there's a ton of replay value there within a short time frame. It's the type of thing that you'd want to take a break from for a while, at least in my opinion, before you go back and play it again.
That's very true.
Which I think also kind of justifies some of people's initial frustrations with it at launch was, A, they were looking for the next Mario game in terms of things. I mean, especially when you're coming off the N64, where Mario 64, which many people view as the greatest Mario game of all time, with its closest competition probably being Odyssey, being a launch title for the previous Nintendo system, being the N64, and doing extraordinarily well. A lot of people probably figured the GameCube was going to launch with something similar. Then they see Luigi on the front cover, this creepy aesthetic that's not necessarily something Nintendo always goes for, gameplay that's not centered around platforming at all. As a matter of fact, you can't even jump in this game.
Right.
So it's interesting, and I can see why some people would be a little bit upset with that at the GameCube's launch, because you've got this shorter game with some simplified aesthetics that wasn't directly what you were asking for. But overall, I think the game in retrospect is viewed very well.
Right, and the gameplay itself is extremely unique. I mean, it's really hard to give this game a genre at all to fit into. I mean, it's not a platformer, it's not like a sports title. I mean, is Sucking Ghosts a sport? Maybe. It's certainly not a horror game. A puzzle game, possibly? I don't really know. Yeah, I know. We were about to fight those ghosts right off with your help.
I mean, you can punch them, right? That should work.
I thought the ghosts punched him.
That's how most beat-em-ups work. You just punch the ghost. This is a beat-em-up, I think.
Is it? Maybe. There was punching.
Yeah, can we classify Luigi's Mansion as a beat-em-up?
Oh, see,
he punched. Yeah. That was a pretty quick
That's
response
the confirmation.
From the game. Yep. Yeah, I feel like puzzle, if we had to force a category on it, is the best fitting one, but none of them particularly, I think, fit super well. Like you said, the game focuses around a lot of different things, including capturing ghosts, solving puzzles within the mansion, finding how different things connect, a little bit of explorations thrown in there, and that type of stuff, but it doesn't center around one genre, and it is very unique, which I think makes some of the repetition amongst it a little bit more forgivable, because you're not going to necessarily find these same gameplay mechanics elsewhere.
That's true, and I feel like there's enough detail in Luigi's Mansion where you could play it a couple times and sort of sort of find something new each time.
For sure, and in terms of that, it certainly helps that they nailed the aesthetic right on with this game, especially the soundtrack. We spoke a little bit about that while we were even playing it. The music for this game is quite fantastic. It's a mix between eerie background music and then flat out like 80s disco meets Persona soundtracking, which doesn't sound like it should work on paper, but give it a whirl. Just pop on this game's soundtrack one day. It's very, very good.
And Luigi hums it during the gameplay, which is a really nice touch.
Yeah, they actually threw in a lot of neat audio touches like that. Or like if you stayed on the controller screen long enough where you're just setting things up. I think I looked it up right before we did this. In 3 minutes is the approximate time. It starts throwing in another track that the main composer for the game throws into every one of his games.
Yeah, Toteka's song, I believe.
Right, yeah. So they actually put a lot of effort into this game audio-wise, or at least it seems that way. And it's something that's very rewarding just to listen to.
And the sounds.
Yeah, the sounds are good too. Honestly, so far the soundscape of this game has been really nice. Between the soundtrack, the vacuum actually sounding as obnoxious and stupid as a vacuum, everything else, I have to give them some credit.
I'm very easily entertained.
And once more adds to a little bit of the fact that while the gameplay may be a little bit repetitive, that can be forgiven. And they at least mix it up with the boss fights. I mean, even the brief snippet we did for just capturing some gameplay. Aren't you glad we showed up? For the purposes of this video, that little baby boss battle we did, it was like a mini game in and of itself to fight the boss, which is neat. It almost had a little bit of a Mario Party type of vibe in that sense to me. Like when you went into the boss battle, you entered your own little separate chunk of the game.
Enter the ring.
Yeah, exactly. And then, like, speaking to other games that I think are sort of referenced here, we made the joke multiple times of the welcome back from Pokemon Snap, that after you cleared an area, you'd find yourself back inside EGAD's garage working on whatever. And it's reminiscent of when you would find yourself back in Oak's lab after the Pokemon Snap levels, which is pretty cool.
Welcome back.
Oh, God. That was so all time.
Bring back Pokemon Snap.
Please do, Nintendo. HD would be wonderful to that game. But, yeah, I mean, overall, good game, I'd say. Not the greatest of all time, but...
Well, and a couple other things I wanted to touch on, too, is that graphically, this game is super impressive, at least to me. I mean, it may be because, like, we output, like, upscaled footage through a really snazzy HDMI converter, but even the fact that something this good can come out of original hardware is breathtaking. Like, the cutscenes were just really cool. Like, all the effects they did, the textures looked really crisp. And of course, like, even as you're just walking around, when you interact with things with the vacuum,
it just spins. It's like a dreidel.
What do I win? Dreidel? I don't know, is that how dreidels work?
I'm an uncultured
no
swine,
idea.
so I couldn't tell you.
Dreidels are just discount casinos to me.
Wow. I remember having a lot of fun playing with dreidels as a kid. I didn't understand them, but they seemed really cool.
It's like a top, but religious.
You know, the Bible's science too.
I don't know how to respond.
like, you wouldn't expect a game as old as this is to have all the care and detail that it does graphically.
Absolutely, and that's consistently been one of Nintendo's strengths throughout the years, is while their hardware, generally speaking, especially in recent years, typically isn't the strongest of the generation, they're very good at capitalizing on what power is there. They seem to always be able to work some kind of magic. I mean, it's common, like a common almost meme in terms of what they're able to do with their first party titles on the Switch, despite it not being that powerful and compared to like a PlayStation 4 and an Xbox, still creating these vast environments with exploration and such. I mean, just look at Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. And this game, in terms of the GameCube at least, showcases that off a lot. And I think it's also of the era where developers were getting good enough with 3D games, which you have to remember was just the generation before, for a lot of people who may not be like super familiar with game history, that 3D gaming was becoming a big deal in terms of three-dimensional worlds and such. It was the GameCube generation where I think we can reflect back on these games without them having aged horribly. And I think a lot of people, because of the association of Nintendo with weaker consoles, may sometimes forget the fact that the GameCube out of that generation often had some of the best looking games available. I mean, looking at a game like Luigi's Mansion compared to, say, like the original Ratchet and Clank on PlayStation 2, which was an exclusive to that system, Luigi's Mansion looks a good bit better, and this is me speaking as a huge fan of the Ratchet and Clank franchise.
So, last but not least, I will sort of critique this game a little bit here. The controls I felt were definitely a bit wonky. I'm not sure if it's because they aged or because I wasn't using them right. I mean, it is possible to get used to them because I have beaten this game in the past, but it will probably take you a while. This game is full of moments that will make you frustrated due to not having the controls mastered to a T, whether or not it's rounding a corner and seeing a ghost or having to turn around quickly. Like, it can get a little wonky there as well, but it might have just been me not using the controls properly, because this was one of the first games that really used the C-stick, like, along with the analog stick at the same time, and that's not usually something you would do back then, but that was just my hot take.
Yeah, and that's why we may want to actually disregard what I was saying earlier about the controls, because while I feel like it's aged better than some other games of that generation, I do also have a tendency to forget that, especially in terms of the GameCube controller, using the main joystick in addition to the C-stick is very awkward on that controller.
Definitely.
The C-stick, for those of you who don't use a GameCube controller a lot, and you may be able to tell just by looking at it, is very nub-like. Like, it's not as bad as the new 2DS XL or the new 3DS XL one where it physically doesn't even move, but keeping a grip on that thing is very awkward, and its placement is just strange enough that using both thumbs at once creates this really awkward grip. Now, granted, I'm also somebody who's a bigger fan of a PlayStation controller than, like, an Xbox controller that also has those offset joysticks, so I'm coming from a biased perspective there, but nonetheless.
Yeah, it just kind of felt like one of them was more sensitive than the other.
Yeah, that's another problem. I think that some of that has to do with the movement of the joysticks, and then also we were using an older GameCube controller, which may have something to do with it as well.
Yeah, I abused that thing in Smash.
Yeah,
It's not a good
that's the
controller
typical.
anymore.
That's the typical case of GameCube controllers. That's for sure. But yeah, I mean, any other final thoughts on this game?
I want to do that to my reflection as well, Luigi.
Yeah, I shiver every time I see my own.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Overall, I'd say pretty good game, aged pretty well. Control scheme's not the greatest, but probably a little better than average for its time.
I agree. I definitely recommend picking this game up if you have the chance. It's a great, short, fun game, and it's quite an experience.
Yeah, and I'd almost recommend the 3DS remake at this point, just because it may be a little bit easier to get your hands on. GameCube prices have been skyrocketing lately, unfortunately, and a lot of the first-party titles that are pretty good are finding their prices in the $40 to $50 to $60 range versus the 3DS remake. You may even be able to find it on clearance right now because a lot of places are trying to get rid of their 3DS inventory, so probably $20 to $40 at most. Cheaper and now on the go, and most people agree it manages to still capture the core gameplay mechanics very well, which is the important part.
And you have 3D.
Yeah, if you're into that type of thing. I personally prefer the new 2DS XL for that, but to each their own. Alrighty, that's gonna wrap this review up. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Be sure to leave any constructive criticism in the comments section down below, especially considering this is a bit of a new video format for us. And we'll catch you guys next time with more video game
Happy
reviews.
Halloween.
Alright, I'm ready when you are.
Yeah, that's pretty hot.
I'm ready when you are.
All right, wait, is it on?
Yeah. Hey, watch your language. Gotta avoid that censorship rating.
We're not
you know?
uploading the uncut audio. I'm gonna do the intro and we're gonna upload that.
I thought that was the intro.
What?
Oh, it's more about.
We're just gonna start the video off with that. I mean, it's scary enough. It is the Halloween special.
This is true. But I think that's the wrong kind of scary. It's more of a, like, disturbing, I don't want to hear that sound ever again kind of effect.
If you ask me, that's what Halloween's all about.
It can be. Sure, why not? Anyway, you want to do a legit intro
Yes.
now?